And yeah, welcome everybody onto this call. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today. My name is Roxy Cohen, one of the three organizers alongside Yasmin Pierre and Josephine Gray that's been supporting this panel together. And it's my privilege and honor to be moderating the call today. I'm a member of the Oasis Food Hub Project, and I'm also an educator in climate change. So I just want to offer a few words of gratitude to many of the things that allowed us to come together and be on this call together today, and would invite those on the call to just take a moment to get yourself comfortable, take a few deep breaths, and just relax into your seat and into this moment together. I want to offer gratitude in a way that I have learned from the Haudenosaunee people who practice as part of their peace protocols and protocols developed for a long time to speak gratitude and words of gratitude at the beginning of every gathering of more than 3 individuals. I just want to give gratitude to the water and to all of those who care for and clean the water and give voice for the water. I want to give gratitude to the air and for all of the beings that help to clean the air. I want to give gratitude to the soil and the earth and all of the beings that help to care for, regenerate, and protect the soil and earth and speak for the earth. I'm going to give gratitude to the sun and the energy that makes all of our food and all of our lives possible. I want to give gratitude and acknowledgement to the many indigenous nations and peoples that have stewarded the various lands that we are calling in from. Myself, I'm situated in Tekaranto or Toronto right now, and I want to give gratitude to the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, and all other indigenous peoples that I have not named who pass through these lands and have stewarded and cared for these lands to make it possible for us and the beings today to live and breathe here. I want to give gratitude to each one of you who have chosen to take this time to be on this call today and to put your energy and intentions into creating a better world and a better food system. And thanks to our partner organizations as well that put out the call and made this series possible, to the National Farmers Union, Conscious Minds Cooperative, Greenpeace, and the Oasis Food Hub. And I want to give just another chunk of gratitude to all of those who have come before us and done the work and created this space that allowed each of us to be here today, and all of those who will come after us, who give meaning and purpose to our lives and our work together here. So thank you. Thank you for indulging me in that. So welcome to the second call in a series of 3 calls that make up the Emergency Food Forum. This series was imagined as a space for folks who are actively engaged in creating a just and resilient food system to come together and step into further agreement on the food system that we want, to do that dreaming work together, and to actually start to build the networks, develop the strategies, and come into agreement around some demands to enact and bring that just food system that we want into reality. On the first call, those of us present came into dialogue on the tension between the healthy, resilient, and fair food system that we want and the unequal and wasteful and dominating food system that we currently have. And we also spoke on how to move from the current system into what we want. And that's the conversation that we're continuing today. In this second call, we gather again for a panel and a discussion, acknowledge why a panel and why this panel tonight together. Each of us on this call, the panelists and every single one of us, are actively creating a regenerative and resilient food system. For some, it's been 20 plus years of putting in work and energy and heart into creating good food and channels for good food. And for others of us, this call may be one of our first steps of action in that process. This forum serves as a reminder how many of us there are working towards this better system, and also a reminder of how much we need each other to actually enact this, and that it's in our relationships that a new food system will emerge. And perhaps acknowledging too that our ties to one another are not as strong as we want or need them to be in order to bring a better food system into existence. So the forum is an opportunity to listen, to expand understanding and to be heard, and to weave connections with other individuals that uplift you and your work, as well as uplifting a healthy system for all. We're fortunate to have 6 wonderful panelists with us this evening to share in the lessons and insights that each of them have gathered through their experience and time spent in their unique places and with food. And I invite the rest of you as witnesses and listeners to the panel to notice as they're speaking. Notice within yourself, maybe what experiences connect or resonate with you, what feels new and exciting, maybe what feels tense or makes you feel a little nervous when you're hearing it too. Ultimately, this forum is an opportunity to practice coming into agreement and into cooperation. And this takes honest conversation that I invite each of you into tonight. Our first panelist, Crystal Sinclair. Crystal is Neha Cree, and her community is in the Fisher River Cree Nation in Manitoba, Treaty 5 territory. And she has made Toronto her home since 1986. Crystal is an artist, hand drummer, facilitator, public speaker, organizer, panelist, water protector, land defender, and Indigenous rights activist who started the I Don't Know More Toronto in 2012. Crystal's an educator on Indigenous issues as has been involved in the environment and clean water campaigns on Indigenous communities. Crystal is involved in food security issues with Indigenous communities, including as a producer of a documentary film called Reckoning with the Wendigo, and as the chair of the board of directors with Food Share Toronto, among many other titles she holds. And Crystal, I pass it off to you.
Thank you for the invite to speak and for introducing me. I am Neha Cree. My community is just outside of Winnipeg. I'm going to start off talking about Food Share a little bit and a little bit about my community, and as well as, you know, the issues of food sovereignty. So Food Share Toronto addresses food insecurity and focuses on community-led projects. It has a community-led approach. And during the COVID-19, Food Share is working quickly and closely with frontline agencies to ensure folks who are facing food insecurity during the COVID-19 pandemic are getting access to good food. The programs that are offered at Food Share is the Good Food Box. Some of you may know that about the Good Food Box. It's a fresh weekly, affordable food of fresh fruit and vegetables delivered to your home, to your door. And also Food Share has a bulk produce program. It offers food solutions, has fresh, high quality, culturally diverse, and low cost vegetables and fruits delivered to your school, daycare, community hub, and food-based businesses as you need them. And then Food Share has a Good Food Cafe program. It also has a student workshop. Students have an approved food curriculum. They can build rooftop gardens and that kind of thing. They have the Good Food Markets. They have the mobile Good Food Market as well. They have the Sunshine Garden at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. They have school-grown projects, and they also have the educator training. And they have a Good Food Machine. They have the Supporter Partnership Platform, community kitchens, student nutrition, the food links, the good food markets, school grown and composting, community gardens, facilitation and training, chefs in the classroom, kitchen incubator, and something called Kate's Kitchen, and finally baby and toddler nutrition. I also am going to read off some more information of FoodShare's history and what inspires their work. There's a right to food in the country since 1976, yet over 4 million people are food insecure. The food this country has made available for those 4 million people through charitable means is often not nutritious and often lacking in fresh fruits and vegetables. FoodShare opened 4 years after the first food bank opened in Canada in 1985 to try to address this issue in a different way through improving access to fresh produce. What FoodShare does? FoodShare runs various programs from subsidized produce markets to urban farms to partnering on student nutrition programs that feed over 200,000 kids in their schools across Toronto. During the pandemic, the funder of this initiative, Toronto Foundation for Student Success, has been providing gift cards to families in need. FoodShare has an Indigenous advisory circle who help direct our work, including helping to guide us in our work with Indigenous organizations to advance food, access, and Indigenous food sovereignty. This group has played an instrumental role connecting FoodShare to other groups and guided us in our work supporting communities in the north of Ontario, in establishing affordable produce markets and setting up paid employment opportunities through Misway to Indigenous people at FoodShare. They've advised on our food justice statement, our strategic plan, body positivity statement, and our ongoing advocacy initiatives. The Indigenous Advisory Circle is a key part of the FoodShare family. COVID-19, the FoodShare quickly saw the need to respond to offering emergency food support to those being hardest hit across the city. We're working with over 50 organizations and groups to distribute emergency food boxes filled with fresh fruit and produce to families across Toronto. These groups include Black Creek Community Farm, Maggie's Toronto Sex Workers Action Project, Ryerson Black Liberation Collective, Migrant Workers Resource Center, and many more. The Indigenous Advisory Circle has connected us to organizations such as Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, Ms. Mamwabzada, another program, and Namerez, Native Men's Residence, a shelter, to ensure that we're able to support as many Indigenous families during this pandemic as possible. The Good Food Box is available year-round as one of FoodShare's social enterprises. Typically, we pack and deliver around 200 boxes per week. We are now doing over 4,000 boxes per week. If you would like to learn or place an order to the Good Food Box to support FoodShare's work, you can check out the Good Food Box at FoodShare. They've also provided all staff required to work at FoodShare Essential Services staff with a one-time bonus and have increased their hourly wage to $4 an hour. They're also providing extra time off to assist with childcare needs and all staff with a free Good Food Box and anything they need to work safely from home during this time. And they're also supporting artists that have been affected by the pandemic by hosting a webinar series titled Nourishing Artists. So that's the work that FoodShare is doing right now, and so addressing the needs during the pandemic. So I guess what I want to talk about a little bit now is about things that have encouraged me. I haven't lived on my community, but I'm still very involved with my Fisher River Cree Nation peeps out in Manitoba. And so what I wanted to tell you about Fisher River Cree Nation, which I feel is one of the models in helping to address sustainable development, is that my community has, the chief is been very instrumental in our governance systems, bringing them back, moving away from the Indian Act and colonial oppression. And so one of the things that he has done with our band council is to introduce a solar farm. So we have a 7 acres solar power farm, and it's the largest in the province and the first Indigenous owned utility scale solar farm in Canada. Another step in generating revenue for our community. And over the next 30 years, the 3,000 panel, 7 acre solar farm will be selling power to Manitoba Hydro. Individuals are trained in solar installation. And it lessens the environmental impact and the production of green energy. This project easily powers 250 to 350 homes. And so it can be duplicated in other communities. And this is really important for me to see this because it's part of the self-determination and being able to have power over your community and the resources instead of always extraction companies coming to Indigenous communities and extracting and leaving communities with poison water and a poison environment. And so this is another way, like I said, that communities can learn to be self-sustaining, move away from the Indian Act and the oppression of the Indian Act and genocidal policies. And I also wanted to give you a reference that I have looked to. And this is, I don't know if you heard of this book. It's called The Reconciliation Manifesto by Arthur Manuel. You can look into this book. It's going to be very helpful, especially during this time. I had to pick it up again. It's called The Reconciliation Manifesto, Recovering the Land and Rebuilding the Economy. According to Arthur Manuel, I'm going to take a quote out of his book, which I think is very important to remember, that the impoverishment of Indigenous people and their oppression is systemic. It is the loss of our land that has been the precise cause of our impoverishment. Indigenous lands today account for only 0.36% of British Columbia territory. He's from British Columbia. But then he goes on to say the settler share is the remaining 99.64% of land. So in Canada, overall, the percentage is even worse, with Indigenous people controlling only 0.2% of the land and the settlers 99.8%. With this distribution of the land, you don't have to have a doctorate in economics to understand who will be poor and who will be rich. Our impoverishment is a big part of the crippling oppression Indigenous people suffer under the existing Canadian colonial system. This 0.2% systemic impoverishment is used as a weapon by Canada to keep us poor and too weak to fight back. It is used to bribe and co-opt Indigenous leadership into becoming neo-colonial partners to treat the symptoms of poverty on the Indian Reserve without addressing the root cause of the problem, which is the dispossession of all of the Indigenous people's territory and their land by Canada and the provinces. So as you may know, the Colonial Indian Act is a part of a long history of assimilation policies and genocidal policies that intended to terminate the cultural, social, economic, and spiritual well-being of Indigenous people. Residential schools and 60s scoop, removal of children, murdered and missing women, and the list goes on of the genocidal practices from the colonial state that we have to endure, and still today. And so self-determination and self-government is essential for Indigenous people to thrive. Indigenous communities need to have their land base. Indigenous people continue to carry on in the struggle for sovereignty. We need to continue to protect our Indigenous treaty rights and the land and the water, and we have to take stand from, resource extraction industries. And so Indigenous people have to, number one, tackle the oppressive policies that are put out from the government. And we have rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, Section 35.1, as well as the duty to consult, and often those are violated. And also we have to look to Indigenous people who have a relationship with the land, and we have to look to Indigenous knowledge, the deep connection with the land that we have. I'm going to end off by saying that as an urban Indigenous person, people who live on the margins do struggle. I mean, it's not easy for them to go to a store and see the shelves empty. They are on a fixed income. But some of the solutions that are being tackled in Toronto is through a restaurant and a friend of mine called Nish Dish. They started a community hub at Christie and Bloor. I believe it's called the Bickford Center. So they've started some initiatives out of that. And so I'd like to see more community-led Indigenous community initiatives that are being led to help tackle the problem of food insecurity. And I want to end with something that I read by Charlotte Coty in her article called Indigenizing Food Sovereignty, Revitalizing Indigenous Food Practices and Ecological Knowledges in Canada and US. So coming together in meetings, conferences, and discussion groups, Indigenous elders, traditional harvesters, and community members developed 4 main principles of food sovereignty that frame and guide this new Indigenous food sovereignty movement. 1, sacred sovereignty. Food is a sacred gift from the Creator. 2, participatory is a call to action that people have a responsibility to uphold and nurture healthy and interdependent relationships with the ecosystem that provides the land, water, plants, and animals as food. 3, self-determination. It needs to be placed within a context of Indigenous self-determination with the freedom and ability to respond to community needs around food. And finally, policy provides a restorative framework for reconciling Indigenous food and cultural values. And I'll leave it at there for now. Thank you.
Next up, I'd love to introduce Leticia Ama De Awo. Leticia is a longtime resident of the Jane and Finch community and a mother of 2 children who has been leading a social activist work in Jane and Finch area of Toronto and across the city for the last 12 years. Leticia has been instrumental in the development of a number of community groups and initiatives, including the Jane and Finch on the Move and Jane and Finch Action Against Poverty. Leticia helped facilitate the formation of the Black Creek Food Justice Network and the Black Creek Community Farm Resident Council, and has managed to bring together a wide range of allies and supporters to work for the enhancement of community farm and nonprofit urban food development in one of Toronto's most excluded and disadvantaged communities. Leticia is a member of the Toronto Food Policy Council. She is now the chair of Seed Change and is also an instructor with George Brown College. And Leticia, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure many of you know about the Black Creek Community Farm in terms of some of the work that we do. The Black Creek Community Farm, our main focus is really looking at food insecurity within the Jane and Finch community. We do provide outdoor environmental education programs for children from kindergarten all the way to high school. And we also focus on reducing senior isolation and building connections among seniors through some of our program. We have a partnership with the City of Toronto, which looks at collecting surplus vegetables from the community and also from homeowners' backyards, community gardens, and then sharing some of that food with food banks and also using it as part of a food preservation workshop and capacity building as well. So just to talk a little bit in terms of what the farm has been doing, I'm sure many of you have heard about the emergency food box program that we're doing in partnership with Food Share Toronto. To just give a bit of a background, this was like back in, I think, the second week of March, just when we were hearing about, the emergency measures that were being put in place. So really, we were looking at what are some of the ways that as a farm, we can support our community. So one of the things that we thought about was to, do this emergency food program and maybe get like 100, 200 community residents to support 100 to 200 community residents. Of course, that grew very, very quickly to over 2,000 households that registered for food programs from us. We, as many of you know, we're a very small team of people, about 6 staff members, and it involves a lot of coordination as well with Food Share Toronto. And that program, of course, has grown across the city. And I think Food Share has like over 50 community organizations now who have registered for the emergency food box program as well. A lot of the funds came from donations from individuals who donated to us through the program. And then we just got another money from the Community Food Centers Canada to support the program. So deliveries are going out every week to community members. I actually had to close the program just today because of the high number of people we have, and just to make sure that we can go back again and deliver to the same people multiple times. And also there's been a lot of coordination too with some of the organizations within the community. So we're partnering with Jane Finch Community and Family Center, the Black Creek Community Health Center, to really look specifically at seniors who are isolated at home, who do not have, are people that are undocumented, to really make sure that we're able to do our part and to get food to them. The issue of food insecurity, I think, looking at the room of people that are here, I think, we don't need to sort of go over that. And I think we know that the issue has been exacerbated because of COVID. And is an issue that racialized Black, Indigenous communities, low-income communities have been dealing with even before COVID hit. So we know that it's going to be really, really bad in our communities, right? We are always going to be the ones who gets hit the hardest and gets hit the most. So I think for us, it's sort of like doing this piece of trying to get emergency food for people, but also moving our headset back to looking at the long-term strategic planning post-COVID. So what happens post-COVID? We do know that things are going to get really, really bad very quickly. How can we connect with other groups and other residents to do our part and to make sure that we're fighting for our community? So I'll leave it there for later. Thank you.
Next up, I would like to invite our third panelist, Yifan Yin Chen. Yifan is the current president of the U of T Environmental Resource Network and has also been involved with the St. Jamestown Community Cooperative and the Oasis Food Hub project for the last 4 years, which is where they first started getting involved and interested in food system solutions. Yifan has also just completed their undergrad at University of Toronto, and they're interested in how food connects people to each other and provide a space to tackle larger systemic issues. Yifan, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Roxy, for the introduction, and hi, everyone. I'm both excited and nervous to be speaking, so bear with me if I'm a little bit shaky. Anyways, I'm really humbled to be speaking among folks who have been doing so much work in the food system, and hopefully I can also contribute to the larger conversations we're having by sharing a little bit of my own general reflections as someone who's just getting into the food movement. So I have 3 brief points, and I'll try to keep them really concise. So first of all, I think for me, this pandemic has highlighted the importance of collaboration and how we support each other, especially when our resources are low and we're trying to tackle something big. Because of the pandemic recently, the U of T Environmental Resource Network wanted to do something to support U of T students. And we ended up running an initiative to provide U of T students with produce boxes from Food Share for 4 weeks. There were 5 of us on the organizing team, and we had to close it after about 3 weeks because it went above and beyond a capacity at over 800 requests. And this was also throughout the month of April. So all of us were dealing with final exams and assignments at the same time. And it got really stressful at a certain point, but I remember funnily enough, the process being quite smooth. And there were multiple days when people on the team just covered for each other and adjusted to each other's needs and putting generally a lot of work in. The initiative literally, I think, would not have happened if it was just me trying to do all this work by myself. And even when the number of responses got overwhelming, I think we got through it because we supported one another and we added our efforts in together during like a really stressful time. And I'm still amazed that we accomplished way more than we expected to, just in terms of numbers alone. And everyone contributed something, whether it's through the designing of the process, strategizing outreach, or really just doing a lot of the tedious work of like spreadsheets and copy and pasting things. And I think this process of creating, testing, and eventually running a system from scratch seems like a small scale of the work that we're all doing as we envision new ways of producing and distributing and processing food. And if even this small kind of initiative of 4 weeks needed 5 of us to work, I think it's even more important that we need to think about how to foster collaboration and to strengthen our networks when we tackle food system problems, which are much larger, on a larger scale. And I think like although the U-Turn initiative was more of a Band-Aid solution, I think there was something still powerful to be able to identify a problem or a need and then working with a group of people to come up with solutions to address that need. And so I think like that experience kind of speaks to that importance of having networks of solidarity and allies and support in our movements as we work together. And then coming to my second point, I think it's about the need to put things into action, even though you haven't really figured everything out yet. And sometimes we just need to start with small steps in the right direction, even when this, like the larger solution seems like it's light years away. So I've been working with the St. Jamestown Community Co-op and the Oasis Food Hub to start a bulk food buying club in the past year in the St. Jamestown community. And we've spent a lot of time, a long time talking about building a food hub in the neighborhood in the past like years. And there's been so many challenges from like neighborhood politics or community engagement and political structures that's just really dragged the whole kind of process out a little bit. But last summer, we decided to just start with something small and tangible for both ourselves and to show the community, especially because the community were like, we want to see something happen. So we decided to launch the first order for the bulk food buying club last August, even though we didn't have a lot of participants and we didn't have a robust process. And as of February, right before things started to shut down, we made it through 4 orders and a whole system revamp. And we've learned a lot in just trying something out. And it also felt so good to see something, even though it's small. And it felt like a small victory, I think, for myself and for the team in general, because it was a step towards our larger goal. And it made the larger goal seem more reachable because we broke it down into some smaller steps and we accomplished one of the smaller steps. And so I think like sometimes there's no way to like perfect a theoretical solution without really putting something into action first and then just working with whatever comes out on the other side and adjusting as you go along. And then the third point that I have is I think that this pandemic has also shown me that we have so much potential to adapt and to be creative when we want to solve something. I think especially with this pandemic, communities are finding different and creative ways of connecting and supporting one another. Like I've seen a lot of mutual aid groups and grassroots initiatives emerging. Organizing has shifted to online spaces or a hybrid of different things, or even like the banging of pots throughout Toronto in the evenings. And I think personally, the pandemic has also given me the time to ground myself into my own support networks and my own communities to find some space to breathe and to reimagine what can emerge. And so I think I actually carry a sense of optimism in seeing that potential grow as we root ourselves in our communities and connect with one another in a more thoughtful way and more meaningful ways. And I think just to cap it off, I think there's a lot of value in holding a forum like this and for us to like get together and to talk and chat and envision and plan for what solutions and change can look like. There's definitely something comforting in being able to brainstorm together or just chatting or sometimes just collectively acknowledging that, wow, this really sucks. And as someone who's just really starting to get involved in the food movement, I find that being connected people in the food system makes a huge difference for myself in staying involved. Because working with people and seeing their passion has kind of been one of the most rewarding things for me, even sometimes more than the outcome. yeah, thank you.
And I would like to invite in our fourth speaker, Brian Dale. Brian has been an associate member of the National Farmers Union since 2013. He completed his PhD in human geography at the University of Toronto in late 2018, and his research focuses on food sovereignty and agroecology as a means to fight climate change. Brian is getting involved with a new research project team led at U of T that is looking at the food system responses in Toronto in relation to COVID-19. And a big thank you to Brian for joining us from NFU today.
Thanks, happy to be here. So I'm an associate member, as Roxy said, and an associate member of the NFU is a non-farmer member. So there was a farmer who was planning on speaking to you all. He was on the call last week as well. His name's Owen Goltz. He's up in the Caledon area, and unfortunately he had a family emergency he had to attend to. So that's why he's not joining us tonight. So I'm going to say a few things. It's going to be a little bit impromptu and a little bit stream of consciousness, but even if I had fully prepared and had more than 2 hours to get ready for talking to you, I would still not be able to fill in for a farmer. And as Roxy said, I did research on food sovereignty and agroecology for my PhD. And I focused on the Canadian context. So I was looking at mostly what was going on in Ontario and Quebec. And one thing I learned from talking to and meeting with farmers is just how much knowledge they have, which is often not celebrated. Often people look to academics and others who they see as experts when in actual fact, they're the ones who are just doing the work and rolling up their sleeves and not getting the recognition they deserve. So I won't be, speaking for the NFU, but I will say that there were some things that I've heard from speaking to local farmer members recently. There are kind of local, we have locals in the NFU like a traditional labor union in a sense, but we represent geographical areas. And so the NFU local for 305 is Toronto, York, and Peel, which is a pretty big area. But I know that having talked recently to some farmers in the area that they have been saying that this is a stressful time for them. And I think that it's worth just remembering that is high risk. Your production depends on the environment, and especially when you're doing small scale sustainable farming like a lot of NFU members are, they are not they're not relying on chemicals and other things to compensate for the lack of control. They're doing things very much in a way that depends on the weather working out, and it doesn't always. And now, as one farmer said, you're operating a high-risk business in a high-risk environment in this case, and this is essential work, just like people at grocery stores are doing, and there's no choice but to carry on and plug away. So in terms of issues that are being amplified within the pandemic, I think that this is a big one that farming is risky, and even farmers who are doing more conventional farming and relying on chemicals to do what they're doing, theirs is always risky, but is also risky work because it's relying on commodity prices and all kinds of things which make them struggle. There's a lot of risk, as you might have heard right now, because migrant workers, they actually make up about 10% of the agricultural workforce in the Canadian context. So that's a lot of work that we rely on from people coming in from outside of the country. You might have heard recently that they have been allowed to come to Canada, although there have been some challenges with that, which I won't get into. And of course, they have concerns that are still ongoing in terms of making sure that they don't get sick and they have proper protections within their living quarters where they live on farm and all that kind of thing. So the NFU has put out some great work and done some work advocating for migrant workers and for responses that will make sure that they're looked after, and also for supports that farmers need. I'll try to remember afterwards to put the websites for the NFU in the chat box, but it's nfu.ca for the National Farmers Union nationally, and NFU Ontario has a website as well, NFU Ontario.ca. So I'll talk a little bit quickly, just because I know that we don't have a long time to speak. I'll just say a couple of things about the next points here. So in response to some of the solutions we talked about over the last week in the last call, the words food sovereignty and agroecology were brought up in a few cases, and they were mentioned, I think, as in some of the surveys that Roxy summarized at the beginning of last week's call. And I think that those are concepts that, although they sound academic and abstract, and I won't get too much into them right now, I think that they are concepts that we should be learning about and thinking about, and how a lot of what we're talking about is encompassed by those concepts, including Indigenous food sovereignty and other issues, worker justice, and so on. Thanks, Roxy. That are connected, and that they actually can be guiding principles for moving forward. I think that the moving out of this is not going to be quick coming out of the pandemic, and I think that we need to remember that as it's going to be a gradual process, and that we have long-term solutions that we have to work towards while we work on the immediate needs in terms of addressing food insecurity and so on. And I think that food sovereignty and agroecology are so important because they're interconnected, and also because they focus on closing ecological loops and solving a lot of problems related to climate change, which has the potential to also be at least as disruptive as this pandemic has been in the long term, if not in the relatively near term. But also agroecology and food sovereignty focus on closing economic loops as well, right? So I think the demands we need to be making in the near future have to be looking at, farmers' needs and so on. And for example, making sure that farmers markets can open up in a way that is going to be safe for people to attend and so on. But also, so many people don't attend farmers markets because the food is grown there. Look at solutions that are being put forward by farmers and by people trying to advocate for a local food system where the supply chains are shorter, and replicate those solutions. But the government needs to follow sort of what we're doing. A farmer said at a session I was at a couple of years ago that farmers don't lead, they follow. And if we can demonstrate and amplify some of the things that farmers and local farmers have been demonstrating as possible, including through cooperative models that make sure that the food that they're producing is accessible and affordable. If we can make sure that those solutions are apparent to people and amplify what's already going on, then I think that the governments will realize that it's actually possible, right? That these things have been done before. Time is up for me, I think. I will do, I'll just add a couple resources into the chat window afterwards in terms of things that I would suggest you check out, because there's a lot of educational work, I think, that has to happen while we're looking at these demands. And some of I'll mention the sites again in the window that you can check out if you want to see what the NFU is suggesting happens in the midst of this pandemic. Thanks, Roxy.
Great. I'm pleased to introduce, next up is Yasmin Pierre. Yasmin is a recent law graduate, congratulations, and the nature and food campaigner with Greenpeace Canada in Toronto. In her role as nature and food campaigner, Yasmin's advocacy focuses on the critical need to transform the Canadian food systems to be more sustainable, climate resilient, equitable, and ethical. She supports local solutions and initiatives by collaborating with local food and climate justice-centered urban farmers, climate and human rights, and food justice activists and visionaries, academics, councils, and low-carbon plant-based restaurateurs. She also publicly targets global corporations and governments who are heating up our planet and threatening biodiversity by ravaging our forests with industrial animal agriculture. Thank you, Yasmin, for joining us.
Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to say thanks again for everyone for being here. Thank you for that introduction, Roxy. Yeah, and so at Greenpeace, I just wanted to point out that Greenpeace working on food is a new thing. While in the past, there's been, particular campaigns on like tuna or like particular crops like palm oil or cocoa or soy. So we focused on that and how that impacts nature and forests and stuff like that. A few years ago, Greenpeace International started working more on industrial agriculture as a whole and on food as a whole. And so then the national and regional offices, which Canada is one of those, took up this project. And so I'm one of the first campaigners, the first campaigner based in Toronto that's working on this project. And so I just want to say it's been a really humbling and interesting and beautiful process of seeing like how all these amazing strong food actors in Toronto doing great work, like Food Share and also like Second Harvest, and there's so many. I know I'm not naming everyone, and then working also obviously with like the Oasis Food Hub, who I'm partnering with to make this event. There's so many different groups, and learning more about the National Farmers Union. So I just wanted to say it's been incredibly amazing, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this world, and that Greenpeace is finally stepping into this work. I think it's really, really important to connect the environment with our food, because that's where we grow our food, and so it is intimately connected. So as Roxy mentioned, a lot of the work that I've been focusing on is really about that connection between like how we grow our food, how that impacts communities and also climate, and how that's impacting people's ability to eat the food, how that's impacting and other aspects of the environment. And so I've taken there's parts of my work that really focus on sort of broader goals in terms of climate, like when the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report came out in August 2019, we really did a push around that. It was really talking a lot about, it was a special report focused on land and climate change, and it focused a lot on how we use so much of our land. We have a very limited amount of land on our planet, and how we use so much of it to grow food. And so we're growing this food very like in industrial agriculture. That's what I'm talking about, and how we're really not growing it in a very smart way, and we're using a lot of land, we're using a lot of water, and there's a lot of issues that go on with that. So, and then that's sort of like the global side, but there's a lot of work that we do in our campaign, in our team, that's more focused on community solutions, and that's how I've met so many of you. And so, in this, and most recently, within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, Greenpeace has completely readapted all of our work. So basically, there's nothing that we're doing now. No campaign is doing any work that's not focused within the framing of COVID, because we feel like it's really important to use the platform we have and all the resources we have to be really responsive and to support the communities that we live in through this really tragic and, you know, ongoing pandemic that we're in right now. And we see a lot of similarities between this crisis and what's going on with the climate crisis. There's a lot of things we've been exploring how to use this as a real opportunity for systems change. So this is the time. It's sometimes in times like this, in moments like this, when things go wrong, there's these moments of disruption, and we've been focusing on Greenpeace, every campaigner, every person that's working there, on how can we use this moment as a way to do this systems change. And we've been exploring with many diverse groups and sectors of our communities. And I recognize that some of you that are here today were on a panel, like listening to a panel that Greenpeace put on last week on Thursday that was focused on a green and just recovery. And so within our team, we're looking at how food resilient, how included within that green and just recovery is transforming our food systems to make them resilient for people, for farmers, and for the planet. And that includes climate change, but also all the other environmental aspects that go along with that, the ecology. And that this, and also in a broader lens in our team, we've been talking a lot about how it's important in the next part of our launches of our campaign to really focus on what I think Brian was talking about before, and I think Crystal, I think everyone's mentioned food sovereignty and resilience. It's really about how can we empower folks to grow their own food, and how can we empower our local communities to grow more food and be less dependent on corporate agribusiness and industrial agriculture. And within that, how can we support Indigenous food sovereignty? And that brings me to, I know I only have 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to point out a lot of the things that we focused on in what we're trying before the pandemic, and even now within this, there's a lot of things we drafted the sort of city-town motion for climate and food, and I'll just list off some of the things that were in it, and then I'll talk about, maybe list off 1 or 2 solutions that kind of mirror it. So ensuring all inhabitants enjoy access to nutritious and plant-based foods that are recommended in the new Canada Food Guide, and ultimately like locally grown food, reducing consumption of industrial meat and byproducts. And I really want to point out that when we're talking about meat, and I'm talking about industrial meat, I'm not talking about Indigenous folks' harvesting animals on their territory, because we at Greenpeace support that 100%. And I just wanted to make that really, really explicit. So in case anyone wasn't sure that that's part of it. And then how to support local and ecological food producers using good labor practices and reducing food waste and loss as well. And when I was looking through the notes from the last call, I found that a lot of the things that in these broad sort of things that Greenpeace that we talked, those categories I was just talking about, are listed: limiting use of fossil fuels and maintaining our integrity, the integrity of the soil so that we can continue growing, reconnecting with the land and using the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as a guide. That is key. That is fundamental to everything that we do at Greenpeace. Learning more about the languages and more about the Indigenous First Nations of the territories where we live, and also learning from those knowledge, from that knowledge and from those folks about how to farm and how to do things in a more sustainable way, because there's so much knowledge there that many people are not using. So how can we band together and be able to exchange those things in a way that honors the Indigenous folks whose territories that we're living on? And then really working on farmer-centered trade policy agreements, and not having to, like, really working with our migrant workers, our migrant farm workers, to give them proper paths to immigration and living and working conditions. So all of these things, and those are just a few. I tried to list a bunch, and my time is probably up. So I just wanted to say thank you for all of your great solutions. They fit with so many things that we're doing, and I'm going to bring all of them back to our team. And yes, we're going to be trying to include more of those to flesh out more of our campaigns and upcoming pushes. So just wanted to say thank you so much. I feel honored to be here with you.
We have one more panelist, and I'm really pleased to introduce Josephine Gray. Josephine has been a human rights organizer for 30 plus years. As a single mother with 4 children, she co-founded FoodShare and Lyft in the late 80s, as well as about 20 other organizations. In 1995, Jo was appointed Canada's official observer for domestic issues to the UN World Summit on Social Development. And using this title, she has reported to the UN Human Rights Committee about poverty in Canada. Josephine's work has taken her to world summits, social forums, and communities around the world. Jo is currently co-leading the Oasis Food Hub pilot project, a model for community-based, climate-resilient food sovereignty. Thank you, Josephine, for joining us.
Welcome, everybody. It's a bit of a smaller call today, but I hope we have a really great conversation after this, because I really feel very committed to being able to work through this process to make things really happen. You know, we can hear from the other speakers how many things that we can synergize and work together on. And I think, you know, the fact that everything is now kind of blown wide open, I think it's important for us to realize that the things we got used to being in the way are less in the way now. You know, there are people in the civil service who really want answers. They really want to hear from us. They really, you know, they live here too. And I think, you know, we have a much more likely ability now to get recommendations and ideas across to our government. We have to remember that we pay for that government, and that government's supposed to be serving us. So this, of all times, is a time when I think we can count on building a stronger relationship there, so we can bring real solutions forward and get support for them. Because whether or not we have funding, sometimes we have to get government at least out of the way. But I would also encourage us to consider, you know, how we can combine forces here. And I wanted to bring forward the idea of using a human rights framework in our process, in our advocacy. It's been very, very helpful and important in our neighborhood and our community, which is incredibly diverse. For us to be able to work together across a lot of differences, different faiths and the like, the human rights framework has helped us to keep people able to govern themselves and work together, but also to take stock of what is required for a resilient food hub. What are all the elements that need to be present for us to have a community-based resilient food hub? You know, we realized very quickly that we couldn't rely on these long supply chains. We have people from all over the world in our neighborhood, and understanding that our global food system is starting to break down, partly because of climate change and partly because of corporate rule. You know, food as a commodity is not making us secure, that's for sure. So this is how, you know, using a human rights framework has helped us to then create a very robust model. And we want to be able to share with everybody some of the tools and platforms that we've come up with as a way to be able to organize across very different groups and very different sectors and keep moving forward in a way that respects justice, respects the environment, respects ecology. So part of that is exactly the human rights framework, but there's also things like using the cooperative structure. The cooperative structure is an autonomous, sovereign form of economic democracy that can allow people to create their own economic realities and meet their needs without having to rely on either government or the corporate sector. And I think it's incredibly valuable. And it's been very much an excellent model for the Global South. There's a great deal of people in the Global South who've come to our country who are aware of the value of the cooperative model. So it's something that I think we can utilize often and well. And there's a growing co-op sector in food and farming that I want us to know about and be aware of, the local farm and food co-op. And we're a part of that via Oasis Food Hub. We've also found that using the applied human rights framework makes people understand the needs of others better and feel compelled to allow things to be complex enough to be inclusive of and supportive of those who are vulnerable in the community. And that's a really critical piece. But it's also very important because as we activate and we make demands and we push for change, we're going to run into some roadblocks sometimes. We're dealing with an incredibly ignorant and frustrating provincial government at the moment. And sometimes it's going to be important and helpful for us to invoke the law. And we need to remember that human rights treaties are the law, such as UNDRIP, the rights of the child, etc. So this will help us build our food system by making sure that where they won't support or help, like perhaps the federal food policy or the city's food policies, even if it's the provincial government trying to stand in our way, we might be able to push them out of our way by utilizing human rights law. So I think, you know, a couple of things we'd like to share with this network, this forum and hopefully a growing network, is the idea of using a time bank. Time banking is a really important tool, I think, because especially at this point in time when we are suddenly realizing the value of time. And I think our most precious resource is time. If we're going to be able to shift and change how we live and how we run our food system together, we need the time to do that. And the time bank can help us to organize that, to value that, to track and monitor it. And it can connect people's needs with people's resources, what people have to offer, what people, you know, in real time. So if, for instance, a farm needs a bunch of workers to come up and do planting, they can call out in the time bank, and then hopefully people in the time bank will have some skilled workers on there who will be able to respond and react. And then somebody who might have a school bus could, you know, drive them up there, and that could all be captured by the time bank at the same time as being inspired by it. So the time bank is an excellent tool that I really encourage people to think about and look into as a way to us self-organize across many organizations. I need to mention that, you know, this forum and the people who are doing it are mostly volunteers, so we don't have like some big robust staff crew that can do all this work. So we're really hoping we can all work together and build tools like this and actually work together to build a food system based on everything we've been discussing. Thanks so much.
I'm going to close our call tonight together now. Thanks, Sierra. And just say again, thank you all so much. We have a third call happening next week. So next Tuesday, May 5th, same time, 7 p.m. And during this call, we are planning it out of what emerged from call number 1 and call number 2. And we're going to be spending more breakout room time, really trying to delve into, okay, what do we want to do beyond this call series? What are the particular actions? What are the specific demands that we as individuals are interested in pushing forward individually and collectively? And then those can be spread out and shared out afterwards through our organizations, our networks, and of course, Basecamp, and hopefully our tendrils and our mycelium webs of personal connections continue to be nourished and spread and grow. Thank you again to our panelists and to each of you for such a wonderful call tonight. I wish you a really good sleep and good rest this evening and a wonderful week until we see you again on Tuesday.